Thank you to Tarot in White Oracle, where we get into the cloud to see what we see. This is our learning center, and everything is free, and I will be publishing this one right after our 1600, 1700 original deck and basic history video. I promised I was going to get you guys one from the 1400s, and that I did. So I wanted to go through, and the reason to me why it's so important is because I like to see where the links and connections come along, especially with the Kabbalah, Hebrew letters, and Egyptian, because to me, that's the most fascinating part of the tarot, especially with its connections to the Urim and Thummim, which so few people really understand its connections. A lot of people understand its connections to the Kabbalah and the Hebrew letters, and a lot of people debate that that's even true, which I would say, after studying this, it most definitely is, and it wasn't an accident. But not many people understand that it's actually connected to Egypt or how language evolved, and that's the reason. And very few people are very much aware of the Urim and Thummim connection to the tarot. I would say very few people have put those together. So this is why I am sharing this information to you, because I see links all over the place, and I would love to explore that further with you. So without much ado, let's dive into it. So quick history, and then we're going to dive into, this is the 1400s decks. This is the Visconti and Forza deck. And it's also called the Golden deck because it was done in color and golden leaf. It was, done by, I believe it was the Duke Filippo. Filippo? I'm not sure how you say his name, but his last name was Visconti. And he commissioned a deck, and he was very wealthy in Milan, and he wanted a card deck that had virtues and temptations. We don't know for sure the exact story, but supposedly his secretary, I've learned, I'm just learning this part, I was speculating before that there must have been some sort of link in the mystical. And it turns out his secretary was an astrologist. So if that's true, there you go. That would be where maybe he linked it. And then the astrologist, maybe that person knew someone who knew Hebrew letters, and maybe that's where it came about. But anyway, so the original deck, no one knows for sure, how many cards there were. As far as trumps. Now I'm focusing on the trump cards because the trump cards are the ones that are associated with the Hebrew letters and associated with the Egyptian and the Urim and Thummim. The court cards and the minor cards do also have importance. The minors, of course, are the Sephiroths, and they're related to the 10 attributes and the 4 worlds, and each of those qualities. And the court cards, of course, are a third group that isn't really connected directly to the Kabbalah or Hebrew letters. It's just in there. So I don't really focus as much on that aspect. To me, the Arcana are far more interesting because of the Hebrew link, the Kabbalah link, the Egyptian link, and the Urim and Thummim link. So to me, I want to know, well, what was it originally then? Because that makes all the difference to know whether it was actually created for that purpose. So the oldest decks that we have, that we know of, as far as the Visconti, I think they've only found 11 of the trump cards. So they don't know for sure, did the original actually have the 22? But we do know that the Pierpont Morgan Bergamo deck, which was in 1450, and the oldest one that we have, and it's not to say that there aren't any older, it's just the oldest one we found, has 74 of the 78 cards altogether and 20 of the 22 trump cards. The only ones it's missing is Tower and Devil. And I venture to bet they probably did have the Tower and Devil. They were just lost because throughout time, it got lost. So if that's true, or even if we know for a fact 20 of the trump cards existed in 1450 under the Pierpont Morgan Bergamo deck, then I have to presume that they probably had them in the Visconti as well. Also, the 22 standardized deck was evolving in the 1400s, so it wasn't like completely standardized, but it had become the most popular deck. And so soon, all the other competitors that had more or less trump cards had gone out of fashion. And the Visconti evolved to be the strongest, which then evolved into the TDM deck, which then evolved into the Rider, Waite, and Smith, which then evolved into what we have. So I'm going to go through each one and kind of show you because it's pretty cool. So this is the original, imagine, in the 1400s. So you're sitting around your table. These are the cards you're going to be playing with or divination with, right? So these are the wands. And they're basically, you've got your 2, your 3. They're just wands, simple cards, but they're really gorgeous. And you can see the colors and the gold leaves. And of course, we move into our cups. And it's a similar idea. 2, 3, 4, but brilliant coloring. And of course, this is the 1400s. So this is, keep the date in mind because it's quite fascinating. So these are the cards that were commissioned. Now, of course, they're going to be gold leaf because he was rich and he wanted something really nice. So these are our coins. So now if you take a look at, okay, so 200 years later, so this is 450. So 650, we know for sure 1639, we have the John Nobel, and then we have the Philippe Vachier. I think that's how you say his name. Those decks were found, and so we know for sure that this is the way the deck looked at least as far back as 1639. I would argue it looked this way in 1600s. We just don't have those decks yet, and maybe they will show up at some point. But anyway, we know for sure this is 1639. This is how the decks would have looked. So pretty similar to the Visconti deck, but this was simple primary colors. Because now people are needing to pay money for things. They're not rich. They're trying to mass produce them. And these are our cups. And so they have to make it a simplified version. It's not as pretty. But you can see it's a very similar idea. So those are the cups. And then these are the swords. And of course, these are the coins. I also have the TDM deck on another video, so you guys can look at that. And then of course, so this is 1600s, and then 300 years later, or 250, depending on, you know, when you want to start counting, we have the Rider, Waite, and Smith deck. And at this point, they're like, oh no, this is Kabbalah, these are Hebrew letters, we're going to make all these connections, and this is like 1901, 1909. And some people are saying, no, you're just drawing straws, there's no connections. And so, and then they also get the artist Smith, a woman. She's not mentioned on the decks a lot because she's a woman. Ha ha ha. And they want to add to the Minor Arcana the pictures. Now, it's at this point that the pictures are starting to be connected to the Sephiroth and the Tree of Life, the 10 qualities and the 4 worlds. Now, the numbers happen to match up, but we don't really know what the pictures were in the 1600s or 1400s, if they actually did represent more of the Sephiroth or not. But I imagine that link was brought in simply because the Arcana so clearly seemed to resemble the Hebrew letters. And so they were saying, well, maybe this kind of makes sense too. So you can see they evolved a lot over the course from 1600 to 1900. And he brought pictures to the Minor Arcana. That was one of the main things he did. And then, of course, let's go way back to the 1400s. Well, before we do that, let's jump to now. So this is what we've got now. This is our light Seers deck. As you can see, we're all a lot more familiar with different variations in the modern, but the minor all have their images from the Rider, Waite, and Smith. So your Minor Arcana are very much influenced by the Rider, Waite, and Smith from the 1900s and connected to the Sephiroth because of that. I'm not really sure if the original Minor Arcana were connected to the Sephiroth or not. I don't really see that in the card, so I can't really say. But I can say that there are 10 cards and 4 different suits, and there are 10 qualities and 4 worlds, and so you most certainly could, especially since you've got the Arcana that seem to match up. But let's jump to the 1400s. So now we're in the 1400s, and this is what the wands look like. They have an Ace of Wands, Ace of Cups. They're just gorgeous. I love the Visconti Fossora deck. Now the Carrie Yell deck is similar, where they have decks that they found as well, but they haven't found all 22 trump cards in any single deck. So it's hard to know for sure, did it have the original 22 or not? We just don't know. And some people say the Carrie deck was first, the Carrie Visconti. Some people say the Visconti Fessora deck was first. It's so close, it's hard to really know which one came first, but they were around the same time. In my opinion, both of them had 22. We can see that because the Pierpont Morgan Bergamo deck had 20 of the 22, and I don't think it's too far-fetched to imagine they probably had the Tower and Devil and they were just lost because it was just so old. And since we have evidence of that in that deck in 1450, I imagine these decks probably also had that as well. But we do know it's standardized in the 1400s. That's all we know for sure. And then remember, this is the 1600s now. So the 1600s comes up 200 years later. This is what our wand looks like. And to remind you, the wand of the 1400s looks like this. And then we have our cups. So this is the TDM deck. Now this is out of France. So France picks up this idea because the Visconti deck in the 1400s was out of Italy. And see, there's gorgeous cup. France picks up the idea and they're like, they're playing these fun games over there and or divination. Let's do that too. The cup looks like this now. And then of course in the 1400s we have this gorgeous sword in Italy, and that evolves into this sword in TDM deck in France. Now mind you, they're trying to save money because they're mass producing them at this time and it's not for a rich family. That's why they're so much more gorgeous in the Visconti original deck. But that's kind of what they look like. So very similar ideas. And you can see our 1900s, 300 years later, the wand looks like this. And then we move to our cup, and then our sword, and then our pentacle. So you could see a side by side like this. The pentacle goes from here to here to here. So that's just to give you a taste of what that's like. So our modern deck, of course, we've got our ace and our cups, our wands, and our pentacles. So the pentacles becomes this. So this is now 2025. So now let's rewind back into the 1400s. And you can see the court cards. They have their Page of Wands and the Knight of Wands, the Queen of Wands, and the King of Wands. So these are all really gorgeous. You can see the gold leaf, and they're all very similar. This is the cups. You have your Page, your Knight, Queen, King. They're very gorgeous. And then we've got our swords, our Page, Knight, and then we've got our Queen and our King. And then lastly we have our Page of Coins and Knight. I might actually start tarotting with this deck. I love it. Queen. I'm not really a fan of the TDM or the Rider-Waite and Smith, to be honest, but I really love the Visconti. Okay, so then we've got our TDM, and we have our wands, and this is kind of how it shifted into a Page and a Knight and a Queen and a King, and something got messed up in here, but you get the idea. And then we've got the cups. We have our Page and our Knight and our Queen and King. So it's a very similar idea, but it was obviously very much simplified in the France deck. Mind you, this is the 1600s, and they're trying to mass produce these, right? Oh, this is, the coin got mixed up in the wands deck. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look and see. Okay, so what does it look like? Now it's the Rider-Waite and Smith, so it's 300 years later, And they're adding things, making it a little more interesting. We've got our page and our knight, our queen and king. I don't think that the Rider, Waite, and Smith deck is all that bad. I mean, it's all right. But I would say I definitely love the Visconti deck better. The only problem is that their minor cards aren't really informational. That would be the drawback. So this is what in 1900, so this is 300 years later, or 125 years ago from today. They make them like this, 1909. And then this is their court cards for, so, and you can see how we have them today. Like an example, we've got our, and these aren't in order, but we've got our cards that look a lot different. And we've got also an influence of colors and planets that we're starting to add to associate them to carry more spiritual interpretation for spiritual language communication. So then we've got this. So the most fascinating to me, though, is, of course, our Arcana. So we're going to go ahead and dive into that. All right, the magic of technology. So let's pull this up so we can see a little bit better. So with our Visconti deck, of course, these are our Arcana. We have our Fool card and our Magician. So these are the original cards from 1400s, 1450. You can see that they are very, very similar to the ideas that we have today, and even what the Rider, Waite, and Smith is interpreting. So we've got our Empress, our Emperor, and then we've got our Hierophant, which is obviously the spiritual advisor of the deck. Our Lovers, clearly very similar to the Rider, Waite, and Smith, as well as the TDM decks. We have our Chariot, which I love is a woman, because the Chariot is a water sign, and water signs are feminine. So I always wonder why some decks put a masculine, but impressed that the Visconti deck actually has a woman for the Chariot card. And then, of course, we have Strength or Justice. So I believe that in the Visconti deck and also in the TDM deck, the Justice or Strength cards, these are in reverse position. 1 second. All right, some more technology magic, because I wanted to show you this thing that's real interesting. So in the TDM deck, if you watch my other videos that go into all the basic history in playlist 3 as well as 2, well, for you guys it'll be playlist 3, so it'll be after this. We do see that the Justice card and Strength card are in opposite positions from the modern day and the Rider, Waite, and Smith. So the Justice was number 8 and Strength was number 9. And in the Rider, Waite, and Smith, they flipped the position so that Strength is 8 and Justice is 9. So when we look at the Visconti deck, we also see that they have the same form as TDM. So the TDM deck copied or was influenced by the Visconti deck. And you can tell that also because the Visconti deck has Justice as the 8th card, which is what the TDM deck does. And then they have Strength as the 9th card, which is also what the TDM deck does. But when we get to 1900s, those two are flipped. Now, if you watch my playlist 3, you'll learn why they flip it and why I think this was obviously an intentional placement of cards to parallel more evenly with the Hebrew letters because they move 0 from the end to the beginning, which shifts all the letters over. And I don't see any real reason for doing that other than trying to match the Hebrew letters. But what's funny is each of these letters are in exact reverse position, and if you just switch it, they all now make sense, which is also another peculiar thing. But I imagine at some point when printing was done, maybe 2 printings were accidentally switched and they just started printing it that way. It's also possible that the people in Milan, when they were consulting the secretary, he was an astrologist, and maybe that person was speaking with, you know, a Kabbalist or someone who knew Hebrew letters or looking at books. They might have just reversed the information or wrote it down wrong, and so it came out that way because they weren't a Jewish person who knew a bunch of Hebrew, and they weren't a Kabbalist probably. But I don't know. It's hard to say for sure, right? Or maybe they were consulting someone or had a friend who had a book on something, because, you know, artists and spiritual people, they get around. But anyway, so this is our Justice. So we move on to Justice. And then we move to the Hermit, and this is what the Hermit is. So the Hermit originally had what looks like sand, but it could be time too. I remember reading that in the original cards, it was actually time. And it was the Keeper of Time. But I don't know. You could comment on that and let me know. There's also the wheel. So this is what the wheel looked like. I think that the Visconti deck does a beautiful depiction of what the wheel actually is. I think in time they distorted it a lot, but really what the wheel is, it's everything to do with karma, and it's standing on the backs of others for your own benefit, right? And being selfish and putting yourself first. And you can see that very much in this picture. So I kind of really hate the way that they made it into something that had to do with animals and playthings. It kind of distorts the meaning. What's interesting also though is in Babylon they also had the wheel. So their god, and I can't remember the name at this moment, but he created the life force, which was Ka. And you can see that in the wheel. So the wheel comes from the Hebrew letter Kaf, and Kaf comes from the Egyptian cup, but it's also 2 hands revering God above, Ka. And so there's a spiritual essence incorporated in the cup, which is you fill the cup up and it molds into what the shape is, which is an alchemic process, or you could say going through fire to become more Christ-like, or you could say, you know, you can associate all these religious spiritual understandings to that. But the Babylonians and also the Egyptians had a sense of the wheel of life and the God bringing life into existence through carving us through the wheel of life and out of clay, which is just really interesting because the symbolism being a wheel. And we know in Buddhism, there is the wheel of karma. And then the Babylonians also have an idea about a wheel. So it's all connected. It's all very interesting. Okay, so our next card we get is Strength. And remember, these are reversed Strength and Justice in the 1900s deck. But right now we're in the 1400s. I mean, look at that. Gorgeous. And it's not too different from, I mean, it's exactly the way that all these cards are exactly the way that we understand them today. This is Death, Rebirth. Now, it can be argued though that Justice and Strength were not necessarily in opposite orders in this deck, because in the original deck they didn't actually have numbers. In the original deck, I believe that they were numberless because the people who played the games knew the order based on the hierarchy of events that they understood them to be. So this one, in case you didn't know, this one is the Star, and you can see her holding a star way at the top, sorry. think the tower was pretty explainable, and so was the devil. But very interesting. And see, the chain is even there. There's a chain around these two people. That's the same symbolism that we use today. So that was the star. This one is the moon, so she's holding the moon. So there's a woman holding the star, a woman holding the moon. And then we get to the sun, and it's just this kid who holds the sun. But the sun has an image of a head, which is very interesting because, of course, in the original Egypt, it is a head because it's the conscious mind, which is what the sun is in Arcana, our conscious mind. So then we go here and we look at judgment. This is, originally I think it was called the Last Judgment, but very much similar. And then the world, they're holding the world. So this is 1450, guys. So 1450, 1500, 1650, 1750, 1850, 1950, 2050. I mean, it's almost 600 years ago. And in fact, this is the print version, so I'll bet draft versions existed actually 600 years ago. And these are all the same cards, the same arcana that we're using, which I can clearly see is related to the Hebrew letters. And now that I know that he had a secretary who was an astrologist, which brings up all sorts of questions, it's rather interesting. So now we go to Justice 200 years later. Of course, this is a deck that they need to simplify. They need primary colors. They're trying to mass produce it, and it becomes monkeys. I don't know why they did this. It's so stupid. The original card was so much more beautiful. Strength, I mean, even if you're not doing it in gold or a variety of color, the idea was a lot more true to form. And of course, the death looks like this, and then we get to Temperance and the devil, and we still maintain that chain around the two people. The Tower card, so we're in the 1600s now. This is what it looks like in the 1600s. We've got the star, the moon. So the star is still a woman and a star, but now she's balancing water, and the moon becomes animals instead of a woman. We still have kids and a sun and a head in the sun, which is nice. Judgment, and then the world. And it now all of a sudden has 4 different creatures around it. That wasn't in the original depiction. And if we look at the Rider Waite, so 300 years later, we get our Fool, our Magician. We still maintain the temple, or the table. And then we have the temple pieces here in the High Priestess, and she's holding now the Torah. He makes it the Torah because he sees the relationship to the Kabbalah. And then there is the Empress, the Emperor, the Hierophant, and of course our Lovers, 2 people, a choice to be made, our Chariot. But our Chariot now is a man. Oh, out of curiosity, did the Chariot become a man in our TDM, or was it a woman? Yeah, it became a man. I don't know, hard to say. Sometimes they wore wigs. Is that a woman or a man? It looks kind of like a man to me, but it clearly is a woman in the 1400s. And at some point they're like, oh no, let's make that a man. But I think that it makes more sense as a woman because it is a water energy. Okay, so then we have, where are we at here? We've got our Tower, Star. Okay, and now we're on here. All right, so then we get our Strength. And this is what the Hermit is. So this is 300 years later after TDM. And now we're in the 1900s. And this is Justice, which comes before the Will, but it fell out of order. And then we've got our Hangman, which you can see is very similar to, all these are very similar to the originals. And then we've got our Death. I mean, it's this, you know, the same name, the same concept, slight variations. We've got Temperance, the Devil, Tower, Star, and in this one now, it's also a woman and a star, and she has 2 buckets of water. So Rider-Waite Smith is obviously influenced by the TDM deck more so than the Visconti deck, because I can see the artwork is a lot more similar to the TDM. Like, for example, this, instead of the original Visconti in the 1400s. And you can also see, you know, he was influenced with the Chariot, very similar to the way that it is in the TDM deck instead of the original deck. Because the TDM now looks like this, but the original deck looks like that. So you can see that he's more influenced by the French version. Let's see if we can do one more and then we'll end. I know they're super long, but for those that are fascinated, I'm sure you're enjoying. So we do have the Magician. And this is the TDM Magician, or really it's the Pope. And of course the original looks like this. But he is holding something up and he is holding this up, so that's nice. And that was, of course, the TDM. So yeah, very interesting. And of course we have our 100 years later, we get our Light Seers decks and all the other decks that we have for the Major Arcana. And our Hangman now looks like this. It's through the power of technological magic. So our Hangman, you know, looks like this in 2025, and in 1900 it looks like this. And then in 1650s up to 1750s, you know, it looks like this. And then in 1450, it looks like this. So you can see it's a very similar concept, similar names. The biggest difference, I would say, is that in the original Visconti deck, they didn't have numbers. If I'm wrong, let me know. You know, is it just based on the information research that I have? From my understanding, they just understood their hierarchy and they placed them in order. So their emperors, their popes would be first, the fool would be last because it would have the least power. But somewhere along the lines during the TMD, the fool, the 0 card, and maybe because it's mathematical, hey, 0 comes before 1. But what it does is it shifts everything over one placement, which makes it match practically perfectly with the Hebrew alphabet. And so I have to wonder, you know, with the original deck, if that was the intention as well, especially since you can put them in any order. But the fact that they then are ordered very well, I mean, you don't need to mix anything around. It's like they're just in order of the alphabet. Makes it seem like it was deliberate, to me anyway. But in different regions, you know, there were different hierarchies. So in some regions, you know, they might consider the Pope the strongest. In some regions, they might consider the Emperor or Empress the strongest. In other regions, they might consider the Strength card stronger than the Temperance. You know, so there were variations as far as I know. But yeah, so these were the different decks. And I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I will see you later for more Arcana learning. Thanks for joining.